is a federal or a national union. Now, I want you to wipe those words from your mind because they're confusing. Today, we think of our government as a federal government, a strong federal government, and it has an umbrella over all the states, right? And the people that didn't want a strong government were called anti-federalists. But in this time period, at the time they were having the Constitutional Convention, federal meant something different. It was still commonly spelled F-O-E-D-E-R-A-L from the Latin word that meant treaty. And what it meant then was a bunch of like colonies or states that just had a treaty to help each other. Well, that's not what we think of as a federal government now. We think of it as something much stronger. So don't be confused by that word in this section. The argument actually was, do we want to have a bunch of sovereign states who have a treaty to help each other, or do we want to have the states united under one umbrella government? Yes, sir?
On the test, would federal be spelled how it is now, or would it be spelled?
No, in fact, I'm not going to use that word in this context because I don't want you to be confused. The question is going to be, do we want a strong federal government or a weak, just kind of a treaty between all the states? And that was really important, and that argument took up a lot of time in the convention. And you know, that convention went over a whole summer in Philadelphia. And some people said, if we just have such a weak, if our states are all sovereign, like in Europe, they're all separate countries, but we make treaties to help each other, those may or may not be followed. I mean, look at what happened in World War I. Everybody decided in Europe that Belgium would be neutral, and that if that neutrality was violated, certain countries had signed to come to their aid, like France and England. So when the Germans marched into Belgium and started killing people in a neutral country, that forced those people to keep that treaty. But there are times when countries didn't keep the treaties they'd made. And so many people were worried, as if every state was its own country, how sure could we be that we'd fight together in crisis? You know, it was difficult. It was too loose. It was too weak. And many delegates said, no, that's not good enough. We need to be united as a nation, with each state part of that nation, but still having some powers of its own. Well, America at this point had to do what they were brilliant at in that time period, and without this we wouldn't exist today, and that word is compromise. They had to come up with compromises. Everybody had to give a little. The people who wanted each state to be a country had to give up that idea. The people that wanted the government to control everything had to give up that idea, and they had to find something in the middle. Now, they started to talk about, okay, we'll have a federal government that has some charge over all the colonies, or the states as they are now, over all the states, but we'll still give the states some rights. And there were people that were really afraid to have a strong federal government. And I'm going to tell you the main reasons, and you need to remember these. Number one was they feared tyranny by that government. Are we still careful of that today? Do we still have to watch that our government doesn't start tyrannizing us?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Because in history, governments tend to get overly controlling and want to control all the people. That's normal in history. If they can control all the people and then give them enough propaganda to make them think they're not being controlled, maybe the people could still be happy. But usually, you know, your government is, when your government's not giving you complete freedom. Do we have complete freedom to go anywhere we want on the internet? Yes. Do we have complete freedom to disagree with our government and say things against it?
Yep.
Yes. Those freedoms, if you value them, you have to be watching. And people, wise people who studied past government said, no, I'm afraid for us to have a government with too much power, because it might turn into very similar to having a king, only the government is the controlling power. So they feared tyranny. That was number one. The second fear was based on the representation of the states. So they said, okay, if we all become a state in this federal government, we're each equal, right? But that's not necessarily fair, because my state has thousands more people than this little state, and shouldn't my people be more fairly represented? Here's what we need to do. We need to have a government. This is what Virginia said. Virginia, the state of Virginia said, I have an idea. We'll have two houses of government, and in each house will have representatives based on population. So if a country has, I'll use small numbers just to make my point. If a country has a representative for every 1,000 people, and they have 10,000 people, then they're going to have 10 representatives. If they only have 1,000 people, they'd have 1. Well, who was unhappy about that idea? The little states. Yeah, they were afraid they'd be dominated. So New Jersey had an idea, and they said, you know what? Let's just have one house, and each state has one representative. Easy, right? What would be wrong with that?
It's the other way. The big states have no say.
Now the big states aren't equally represented according to their population, and they don't like this. So this argument is going on and on. All right, so I'm going to ask you right now, who thought we should have 2 houses with representatives based on population? Which state came up with that idea? Virginia. Is he right?
No.
Is he right? Yes, he is right. He is right.
Boy, do you want to fight right
Okay, now listen. Which state said we should only have one house with one representative from each state?
New Jersey.
New Jersey. Can you keep that straight in your head? Because it'll be so simple for you when you take the quiz on this.
One Jersey.
One representative from state?
Right. Virginia said 2 houses, but each of them would have representation based on population. So Virginia went the popular way. All right, the other one was 1 house with 1 representation from every state, and that was what state came up with that plan? Okay, and here's a key to help you on your quiz. This will make it really easy. The first plan is called the Virginia Plan. The second plan is called the New Jersey Plan. The third idea is called the Connecticut Compromise. It's not, they don't use the word plan because what Connecticut did was they came up with this brilliant idea to make everyone happy. They said, let's have 2 houses. One, the representation is based on a certain number of people from each state, 2. And the other is going to be based on a representative for every so many people. So we'll have 1 house based on population, 1 house based on the states. And they have to approve what each other does. What do we call that system? Checks and balances. There are things that the House might want to do, but the Senate might stop, or the Senate might want to do, or the House. They're all going to make sure that everybody's happy when the decision comes out. Now, of course, there is no country in the world where everybody's happy with final decisions. But it makes a more fair decision if just one king decided it, right? There's more counsel, there's more debate, there's more thinking about it. And then when they finally decide they want to present something to the public has to vote on it. So look how many people are involved in making the decisions, which keeps it from being a tyranny or a despotic leadership. So we have this idea. The first state, Virginia, wanted what? Noah, what did they want?
They wanted 2 houses.
Right, based on?
Based on population.
Good. The second one, Bill, New Jersey, what did they want?
1 house based on state.
Yes, 1 representative from every state and only 1 house. What did the compromise decide to do, Tony?
Each state has 2 representatives.
That go to 1 house.
Yeah, 1 house.
Mm-hmm. And then, did they only have that 1 house?
No.
They had a second house. How did they choose who went there?
Like different representatives from each state.
Yes, based on population, the number of people.